Hey, welcome back to Audio Legends. Last time we talked about the vintage turntables that still make modern decks look nervous. Today we're going deeper and more expensive. The best European hi-fi from the 1970s. The kind of gear that was already special when new, and now will quietly destroy your wallet if you try to put a full system together. We're talking British, Swiss, Danish, and German machines that refuse to play by the Japanese rules. Smaller runs, stubborn engineering, sound that still makes people stay up until 2 a.m., arguing on forums. Stick around. By the end of this one, you'll understand exactly why these pieces keep climbing in price and why so many of us still can't walk away. If you love this kind of deep dive, hit subscribe. It really helps the channel keep going. The Linn Sondek LP12. In 1972, a small Scottish company called Linn Products introduced a belt drive turntable with a suspended subchassis. Ivar Tiefenbrun and his team weren't chasing power or features. They were chasing isolation. The goal was simple and almost stubborn. Stop the floor, the motor, and the air itself from feeding vibration into the stylus. The first decks left the factory looking almost plain. A solid wood plinth, a heavy platter, 3 springs, and a single point bearing. Original price for the basic motor unit without arms sat around 59 pounds. At the time, that was real money for something that looked deceptively ordinary. Today, the same early example in clean condition, fitted with a decent period arm, routinely lands between $2,000 and $4,000. Fully sorted modern versions with the latest bearing, power supply, and arm climb past $25,000 without apology. What happened next still feels a little unfair. The LP12 didn't merely sound good, it became the reference in the UK for years. Dealers and magazines treated it like the only serious option for high-end vinyl. You could change the power supply, the springs, the subchassis, the arm board, the bearing, even the baseboard, and the core identity stayed intact. That modular nature is the part that keeps surprising me when I talk to longtime owners on the forums. I've spent hours reading those threads. One guy bought his in 1978 with an LVX arm and still has it running after a Valhalla board failure that he fixed with a simple resistive pad. Another picked up a tired example for 175 pounds on the classifieds years later, found the bearing completely shot and the arm not even bolted down properly, then spent 6 months slowly rebuilding it, new plinth, new inner platter, Valhalla, Ittuk, and a gold ring cartridge until it became the center of his system again. A third owner who has kept the same deck since the late 70s simply said, "I'll never part with her." That kind of attachment shows up over and over. People sell them during divorce or house moves, then buy another one years later because nothing else scratches the same itch. The upgrade path itself has become part of the lore. Nirvana springs and motor mounts in 1981 tightened the suspension. Valhalla crystal-driven power supply in 1982 cleaned up the motor control. Circus bearing and stronger subchassis in 1993 made the relationship between platter and arm more rigid. Later came trampoline bases, lingo supplies, carousel, single-point bearings, and aftermarket subchassis from companies like Stack Audio or Origin Live. Forum regulars argue endlessly about which step delivers the biggest jump. Some say the circus bearing adds an octave of cleaner bass and tighter control. Others prefer the older pre-circus boogie factor and find the later versions a little too polite. One owner who slowly downgraded a full Climax spec deck discovered that the biggest loss of enjoyment came from the circus itself. Another swore the single biggest improvement he ever heard was a good external power supply paired with a proper setup. Setup is the quiet secret. A poorly adjusted LP12 can sound warm, soft, and a little vague. A carefully set one correct spring tension, perfect bearing oil, level chassis, proper arm geometry suddenly snaps into focus. Timing tightens, bass firms up, voices sit in real space. I've watched restoration videos where a 1975-76 red button deck that had been original for 50 years received only sympathetic service. New belt, fresh oil, cleaned contacts, and a light modern power supply. The owner wanted the character preserved, not transformed. The result still sounded unmistakably like an LP12, musical, rhythmic, and alive rather than a neutral measuring tool. That's the real reason this deck refuses to fade. Most 1970s turntables get restored once and then sit as static museum pieces or slow parts donors. The LP12 keeps accepting new parts while still looking like the same wooden box that left Glasgow more than 50 years ago. You can chase ultimate resolution or stay with the older, warmer character. Either way, the platform remains open. And that combination of longevity, emotional pull, And endless tweakability is why clean early examples keep climbing in price, and why so many people who once owned one eventually find themselves looking for another. 2. The Danish statement piece. Beogram 4000. In 1972, Bang & Olufsen released a turntable that didn't evolve from earlier ideas, so much as start over. The Beogram 4000 was the world's first electronically controlled tangential tracking gramophone. Jacob Jensen shaped its low aluminum and wood form. Engineer Gustav Zuthen, who had worked on aircraft design, helped solve the mechanical problems that made the concept possible. The result sat only about 4 inches high, weighed roughly 12 kilograms, and looked more like a piece of modern sculpture than a conventional record player. What made it different lived under the lid. Instead of a pivoted arm swinging in an arc, the Beogram used 2 short parallel arms that traveled in a straight line toward the center of the record. One arm carried the cartridge, the other held a photocell that sensed the presence and diameter of the disc, then automatically selected the correct speed, 33, 30, or 45. A servo motor drove the assembly along polished chrome runners via a lead screw, keeping the stylus at the same angle the original cutting lathe had used. Tracking angle error stayed under 0.04 degrees. Because the arm itself was short and stiff, inertia stayed low, which helped the whole system shrug off external vibration. That isolation system earned its own nickname. 3 arched spring steel strips suspended the sub-chassis on fine wires, the so-called pendulum or dance-proof suspension. B&O patented it. The claim was practical. You could play records while people moved around the room or even danced without the stylus jumping. Early owners treated the claim as both marketing and mild dare. Operation felt almost futuristic for the early 70s. Light touch electronic controls, a pneumatic air-damped arm lift, and early digital logic chips handled the sequence. The cartridge, initially the SP15, later related MMC designs, used a naked diamond and a non-usable stylus. If the tip wore out, you sent the whole cartridge back for exchange. The entire motor unit, arm, and cartridge were engineered as one closed system, rather than a collection of interchangeable parts. Museums noticed quickly. In 1972-73, the Beogram 4000 entered the permanent design collection at New York's Museum of Modern Art alongside several other B&O pieces. It also collected an IF Design Award and a Danish ID Award. Jensen later said he wanted something that felt both timeless and technically current. The combination of brushed aluminum, teak, or rosewood, and absolute minimalism delivered exactly that. 50 years on, living with one is a different story. The same elegance that made it a design icon also makes it demanding. Original plastic cartridge mounts grow brittle and snap. The broken tab often stays lodged inside an expensive cartridge. Damper gaskets harden so the arm drops with a sickening thud instead of a soft landing. Capacitors age, switches stick, and the carriage drive needs fresh lubrication and careful calibration. Specialists who restore these decks document hundreds of hours of work, new nylon mounts, fresh capacitors, rebuilt motors, recalibrated tracking sensors. Owners on enthusiast forums trade the same mix of affection and exasperation. The deck is the most elegant piece of audio equipment they have ever owned, and also the most capable of testing their patience. Official Bang & Olufsen restorations and limited classics recreations now command high 5-figure prices. Independent restorers achieve excellent results for less, but the parts situation remains specialized. Cartridges, in particular, stay proprietary, yet people keep buying, restoring, and keeping them. The geometry argument still holds. When everything works, the stylus follows the groove the way the cutter once cut it. That purity of idea, wrapped in a form that still looks contemporary, is why the Beogram 4000 refuses to become just another vintage curiosity. It remains a statement, technical, aesthetic, and slightly stubborn about how a record player could work if someone decided to ignore almost every existing convention. 3. Swiss precision and German direct drive. While the British and Danish decks chased radical isolation or geometry, Switzerland and Germany took a more pragmatic route in the early to mid-1970s. The results still feel quietly confident today. Thorens had already made its reputation with the legendary TD-124 idler drive machine. In 1968, the company shifted gears with the TD-125. This was one of the first high-end turntables to use fully electronic speed control instead of relying solely on mains frequency. A 1/6 pole synchronous motor drove a heavy zinc alloy platter through a belt. while the entire top plate floated on 3 springs. The isolation was effective enough that many owners still rank a well-sorted TD, 125, alongside far more expensive modern decks for speed, stability, and background quiet. Early versions offered 3 speeds, including 16 revolutions per minute. The later Mac 2 added a clutch in the pulley for faster lockup and refinements to the electronics and tone arm options. Many left the factory with Thorns' own TP16 arm, but a large number were sold with SME 3009S, still a classic pairing. The control board can age and need attention, yet the mechanical foundation is robust. Clean working examples typically sit between a few hundred and around $1,000, with restored or SME equipped units commanding more. 3 years later, Thorns introduced the TD 160, essentially a refined and more accessible evolution of the earlier TD 150. It kept the 3-point suspended subchassis, the belt drive, and a substantial 7-pound zinc platter, but simplified the electronics. Speed was switched mechanically and locked to the mains. A cable-operated queuing system made the purely manual operation more user-friendly. The stock TP16 arm was competent, and the whole package delivered the kind of warm, unforced musicality that still makes people keep these decks for decades. Production stretched across multiple Mac versions into the early 1990s, which explains why they remain relatively plentiful. Owners often describe them as the set it and forget it Swiss alternative to the more high-strung Linn, easy to service, forgiving of imperfect floors once the springs are properly adjusted, and surprisingly hard to outgrow. Stock examples commonly trade between $400 and $700. Thoughtfully upgraded or restored ones climb higher without ever reaching the stratosphere of rarer names. Across the border in the Black Forest, Dual took a completely different path. In 1973, the company launched the 701, its first true high-end direct drive turntable. Instead of a high-speed motor and reduction system, Dual designed an entirely new low-speed electronic DC motor, the EDS 1000, that rotated at the same speed as the record. The platter spindle was literally the top of the motor shaft. Because the motor was so quiet and free of vibration, Dual bolted it straight to the chassis, no springs, no floating subchassis required. Independent lab tests at the time called it the quietest turntable they had measured. Wow! And flutter came in under 0.03%, rumble figures were excellent, and the 2.9 kilograms dynamically balanced platter contributed real rotational mass. A 4-point gimbal tone arm with built-in anti-resonance filters, full automatic operation, illuminated strobe, and plus or minus 8% pitch control completed the package. Original retail was roughly $350, $400. Today, a clean working example often lands in the $300 to $500 range, still one of the better values in vintage direct drive. What unites these machines is a certain unfussy competence. The Thorns decks reward careful setup and occasional belt or oil attention with years of reliable musical playback. The Dual 701 proves that German engineering could make direct drive both quiet and elegant years before the Japanese versions dominated the conversation. None of them demand the constant upgrading culture of some British contemporaries, yet all three still sound like serious hi-fi when everything is in order. In a market full of overhyped legends, they remain the ones people actually keep using. 4. The speakers that still haunt people. The turntables and speakers of the 70s gave European hi-fi its personality, the amplifiers gave it its heartbeat, and few pieces still make me smile the way a well-sorted Naim Nap 250 does. Quad's ESL, 5-7 electrostatics had been around since the late 50s, but the 70s were when a lot of serious listeners finally heard what a full-range electrostatic could do in a home. Peter Walker's design aimed for the closest approach to the original sound. No boxy colorations, no heavy cones fighting themselves, just panels that move air with remarkable coherence. They're still made in small numbers by the German company that took over the tooling. Used pairs in working condition typically sit between $1,000 and $3,000. Fully restored or late production examples climb higher. They're not for headbanging. They are for the moments when a voice or a string section suddenly feels like it's in the room with you. Then there's the Rogers LS3 5A. This one started as a BBC solution for outside broadcast vans that needed accurate monitoring in a tiny space. The design team at Kingswood Warren, including people who would later influence Spender and other British brands, produced a 5-liter sealed box with KEF B110 and T27 drivers. Rogers got the first commercial license in 1975 and went on to build tens of thousands of pairs. Other licensees included Spender, Chartwell, and others. The mid-range and imaging on a good pair still stop people cold. Bass is limited. Dynamics are polite. But the way they place instruments and voices is addictive. Prices have been climbing hard. Decent pairs that used to sit around $1,500 now routinely ask $2,000 to $4,000, with exceptional early 15-ohm examples pushing higher. One recent YouTube roundup of speakers exploding in value put the LS3 Fifths A near the top of the list for exactly this reason. Vinyl is back, small rooms are common, and these little BBC monitors deliver a kind of intimacy that, big floor standers sometimes miss. Tannoy's dual concentric drivers, especially the Monitor Gold series from the late 60s into the 70s, were the studio workhorses. Abbey Road, Decca, and plenty of other British rooms use them. The idea is simple and elegant. The high-frequency driver sits in the center of the woofer cone, so the sound radiates from a single point. Phase coherence is excellent. 15-inch versions in good cabinets still command $2,000 to $5,000 or more depending on originality and enclosure. Some of the larger horn-loaded systems like Westminster's go well beyond that. These aren't delicate living room speakers. They were built to play loud and stay coherent while doing it. 5. Amplification that refused to be boring. If the turntables and speakers of the 70s gave European hi-fi its personality, the amplifiers gave it its heartbeat. And few pieces still make me smile the way a well-sorted Naim Nap 250 does. Julian Verker's company had only been around a couple of years when the Nap 250 arrived in 1975. On paper, it looked almost modest, around 70 to 80 watts into 8 ohms, more when the load dropped. But those numbers never told the real story. Inside sat a big custom 450 VA toroidal transformer, twin large smoothing capacitors, and fully regulated power supplies for each channel. Naim wasn't chasing laboratory distortion figures. They wanted an amplifier that could deliver current instantly when a real speaker demanded it, especially the awkward, reactive loads that made lesser amps sound polite or soft. Reviewers kept reaching for the same words: timing, pace, drive, the feeling that the music was leaning forward instead of just sitting there. The early chrome bumper cases, black pebble finish aluminum with that distinctive silver front edge, still turn up on the used market for anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000 depending on condition and service history. Later generations changed the looks and refined the circuit, but the original character remains the reference point for a lot of people who grew up with Naim systems. Quad took a completely different road the same year. Peter Walker's 405 introduced the clever current dumping idea. A small, ultra-clean Class A amplifier that stayed in control at all times, while a pair of robust Class B transistors only kicked in when serious current was needed. The result measured extremely low distortion and sounded calm, controlled, and unusually clean. It was also designed with Quad's own electrostatic speakers in mind, plenty of voltage swing without the kind of uncontrolled current that could damage the delicate panels. The 405 never tried to sound exciting in the Naim way. It simply got out of the way of the music and let the recording speak. Clean working examples still hold solid value, especially among people who run classic ESL 57S. And then there was the German approach. Braun, under Dieter Rams, treated amplifiers and receivers as pieces of industrial design that happened to make sound. The Atelier systems and related components from the 70s still look like they belong in a museum rather than a hi-fi rack. Clean lines, thoughtful proportions, everything reduced to essentials. They may not dominate the emotional conversation the way the Naim or Quad pieces do, but they prove that European hi-fi could be beautiful without becoming fussy. These amplifiers didn't just power speakers. They argued about what music should feel like. 6. The bigger picture and why the prices keep moving. What ties all of this together is a shared attitude. European manufacturers in the 70s often prioritized specific performance goals over broad market appeal. The BBC needed accuracy in a small box, so the LS3 Fifths A happened. Linn wanted isolation from the real world, so the LP12 happened. B&O wanted the arm to track the way the cutter did, so the Beogram happened. Quad wanted to eliminate the box colorations that conventional speakers couldn't escape. Today, the vinyl revival, the scarcity of clean, original examples, and the simple fact that a lot of this gear still sounds compelling against modern products have pushed prices up. You can still find bargains if you're patient and willing to restore, but the days of walking into a thrift store and finding a pristine LP12 or a pair of LS3 fifth A's for pocket change are mostly over. Forums and marketplaces show the same pattern. Condition is everything, originality matters, and documented service history can add hundreds or thousands to the asking price. I've watched enough restoration videos and read enough long threads to know that owning this gear is not always simple. Electrostatic panels need care. Old capacitors dry out. Belts stretch. Tone arms need setup skill. But when everything is right, there's a directness to the sound that a lot of modern systems polish away. If you've got a favorite from this era, something that still lives in your system, or something you regret selling, drop it in the comments. I read them. And if this kind of deep dive into the machines that actually mattered is your thing, stick around. We've got more stories like this coming on Audio Legends. The good stuff doesn't stay cheap forever, but it does stay interesting. Thanks for listening.